A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
There's no doubt one of the most iconic Christian figures of the 20th century is the man known as Mr. Eternity, and the producer and director of the 2022 Eternity film called Written in Chalk, the echo of Arthur Stace, has just returned from a screening of the film at a major international street art conference in Germany. Australian filmmaker Richard Attieh, the producer and director of Written in Chalk, the echo of Arthur Stace, and of course executive producer of the Australian Television and Media Group, joining us. Richard, welcome back to 2020.
Thank you so much for having me.
Richard, what an honour, what a privilege it must have been, because your film was only one of 8 that were chosen from around the world to feature at this particular conference. How much of an honour is that?
Oh, it's an absolute privilege. You know, we've got this film about this Christian character called Arthur Stace, who goes around and writes eternity on the streets. And he did it when nobody else in the world was doing it. So he's known as the grandfather of street art. And so to be invited by one of the world's leading street art conferences to tell the story of Arthur Stace, it's a real privilege.
Let's just pause and reflect on that for a moment, because this was not a little Christian conference. This was the Art and Place Conference, and they see Arthur Stace, our Mr. Eternity, as the grandfather of street art. Explain that for us.
Oh, it's brilliant. So basically, Arthur starts writing eternity on the streets in the 1930s, and nobody in the world was doing it, certainly on the scale to which Arthur Stace was doing it. So quite often now we'd be driving along, we look at bridges or public buildings or what have you, and you might see some graffiti sprayed on with spray cans and so on. So this conference had elements of that. It also had elements of people who are doing commissioned graffiti and public artworks. But over at this conference, we had representatives from Saarland University, Heidelberg University, a few of the universities throughout the US. We had curators of international well-known museums. And so they came across our film, and they wanted to put on or recognize the person who they revere as the grandfather, the person who started doing street art and graffiti art in Sydney, Australia, which has since gone on around the world. And obviously it's you go into any major city these days and you can see graffiti everywhere. And I'm not sure Arthur Stace would have condoned the type of graffiti that we see everywhere, but certainly as far as getting his message out and having it recognised on an international platform like this, it's a thrill, and I'm sure, I'd like to think Arthur would be pleased.
And your film now is 2 or 3 years old, but you count this as the international premiere for the film. So a little bit of a red carpet opportunity here. I mean, who turned out for the screening? Can you describe the crowd for us?
Oh, yeah, the crowd were it was the leaders of the street art community from around the world. As I said, there was representatives from various universities. There was someone from Cyprus University, someone from the University of Russia. We had an advisor to the government in Romania who was at this conference. So there was a lot of people there who not only practice street art, but also talk about street art. And they ask the question, and this is one of the questions that I was asked to answer in one of the panel discussions: how does street art and the way it is delivered and interpreted impact on the way cities see themselves? So the question which I was sort of asked to grapple with was, how does the way eternity has weaved itself into the story of Sydney's history, how does that help to shape the way Sydney sees itself today? And it's an interesting parallel, because in the film, what we very much do is talk about looking at the different ways eternity has been understood between the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and so on, right up until today. And it does, the way that word has been interpreted and reinterpreted and represented, it does give us a lens through which we can understand ourselves, our history, our culture, our identity. And these guys wanted to talk about that on an international platform. So it was a real treat.
You know, Arthur Stace, Mr. Eternity, and he became quite obsessive about writing that word eternity on the footpaths throughout Sydney. And I wonder if you've got a little bit of a way the progression went, because he grew into legendary status. There was this secret thing that he was doing, and it was eventually uncovered, but then went on to feature very significantly on the Harbour Bridge and at the Olympic Games. Just give us a little idea of the progression of the word eternity, because it's a loaded word. It's so powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And it's open for interpretation. And if you ask 100 different people, can you tell me your understanding of eternity? What does it mean to you? You're probably going to get 100 or at least 80 or 90 different responses as to what eternity means. But, the story really starts with a preacher called John Ridley, who delivered a sermon called The Echoes of Eternity in Sydney in 1932. Arthur Stace was in the congregation that night, and as the story goes, Reverend John Ridley said under his breath towards the end of his sermon, "If only I could shout eternity across the streets of Sydney." And so Arthur took that call, took it as a challenge, and then started writing eternity on the streets. He did it anonymously for so long, and then when he was discovered, he became a celebrity almost overnight. And newspapers and radio stations, so many people were talking about, who is this Mr. Eternity? So Arthur goes to become a celebrity straight away. He passes away in the late 60s, and then his word more or less goes sort of, if I say undercover, it gets picked up by the arts community. A lot of independent musicians, writers, sort of, cartoon artists pick up the word and just incorporate it into their artwork somehow. And then a fella called Martin Sharp incorporates it into his artwork. Now, Martin Sharp, for anyone who might jump on Google and Google the name, he is one of Australia's leading artists of the late 70s, 80s and into the 90s. And it was the work of art of Martin Sharp that then inspired another fella called Ignatius Jones, who happened to be the creative director of the Sydney Millennium Fireworks. Now, he heard the word eternity, and in the film we give a bit of a backstory as to how we got there. It's a wonderful story with a work experience kid suggesting this to Ignatius Jones. But Ignatius Jones goes and pitches the idea of Arthur Stace's eternity appearing on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So Arthur Stace passes away in the late 60s. A bunch of artists incorporate into their underground artworks. Martin Sharp picks it up, puts it on tea towels and gives it a bit more prominence. And then Ignatius Jones puts it on the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the year 2000. Ignatius Jones was working for a fella called Rick Birch, who happened to have the contract for the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games opening ceremony. And so not only did the word appear on the Harbour Bridge, it then also appeared in the opening ceremony of the 2000 Games. Now, for me to turn up to an international street art conference and to tell that story of all of these artists who go in with spray cans, putting tags everywhere, talking about how Mr. Eternity's tag, the word eternity, and his motivation was the message. And I made it quite clear when I was there that Arthur made it very clear that to him, eternity was something that he had to face. And he believes that all of us have an eternity to face. And he asks the question, are you ready to face eternity? And that's why he did it. And so I imagine all these street artists are going to pick up the word eternity because of this conference and start delivering it across their cities around the world.
Well, Richard, you are now part of the history. I mean, just to contemplate that Arthur Stace is now renowned as the grandfather of street art, not just here in Australia, but there's a sort of a global appreciation for that. Hey, when you were invited to introduce the film at the fabulous film convention that you were at, you were also invited to be a part of a panel discussing the street art. And you gave everyone a piece of chalk. That's a nice lasting impression, isn't it? What sort of response did you get in the Q&A on the day?
Oh, it was wonderful. Some of them asked, what do you want us to do with this chalk? And I said, why don't you go around the town and write eternity everywhere? And so sure enough, we saw that. So in Saarbrücken, Germany, right on the border of Germany and France, after the screening, there was eternity, which appeared in the main square next to some of the monuments on some of the walls. It was quite nice to see that initial response within 24 hours of the screening. But, the one of the unique things about this particular word is that it just has the ability to resonate with something deep down inside of us, and it's not something that you tend to put down quite quickly. So I think the real magic, and certainly what Attieh has shown us, is that when you consistently do something over a long period of time, it becomes sort of ingrained in what you do. Now, I honestly, I'm excited because the people at this conference were impacted by eternity. I had a number of faith conversations after the screening and the following day about people wanting to really understand Attieh Stace's why. And it was my privilege to explain to them how Christ had impacted Attieh's life, and that was his motivation. And Attieh wanted us to consider our place in eternity. Now, I think a lot of these street artists are going to take that message and take that challenge and understand and work out what eternity means to them and then represent it. That's what I'm most excited about. Attieh's legacy has the potential to continue through the people who were at that particular screening.
And for every one of us listening to our conversation and hearing your heartbeat and hearing where this whole thing has gone, the word eternity, a powerful word, and as you say, there's a little bit of mystique. There's a mystery about that, and it gives you an opportunity to think about eternity and just to hearken back, just as we draw some loose ends together. You mentioned that eternity provides something of a lens by which we can understand Sydney, the community, the culture, and even Australia with our recent history. It's a powerful word that we ought to have on the tip of our tongue and just understand the Attieh Stace story.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. As John Ridley says in his sermon from 1932, it's born on your lips because it's birthed in your heart. And so we all have a yearning for eternity, and when we can understand eternity through the lens of God's grace, it takes on a different meaning. It's not just the afterlife and the never-ending. It becomes something that we can look forward to.
Richard, wonderful getting your insights. Congratulations on the screening in Germany, the Art and Place Conference. Richard Attieh is the producer and director of Written in Chalk, the echo of Attieh Stace. He's the executive producer of the Australian Television and Media Group. But to find out some more about the film, the website to go to is writteninChalk.com. WritteninChalk.com. Something I don't think you'll be disappointed with. Richard, thanks so much for sharing your heart with us, and congratulations once again. Thanks for sharing these things with listeners today on 2020.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.